So we are in near Regent's Park with Patrick Curry, whom I know since the end of 70s, I suppose. Yeah. And I would like to exchange with you a certain number of reflections. But first of all, we might start with your career in astrology as a writer, as a researcher, as an organizer.
Well, very briefly, I have been interested in astrology and studying it fairly consistently since the late 1960s. I've done 3 degrees, academic degrees, and in each of them I managed to study astrology in some way or associate them with astrology.
Yeah.
The first was astrology in relation to psychology, the second in relation to philosophy of science, and the third history.
Yeah, because there is no department in astrology, so you have to connect with another field.
Yes, that's right. So I ended up writing a couple of books which were basically social history of astrology in England, mainly in England.
Yes.
Then I became more interested in, I suppose you might say, the philosophy of astrology.
Yeah.
And my most recent book on it was co-authored with an anthropologist, Roy Willis, called Astrology, Science and Culture. And since then I've produced a few papers, but no more books.
Well, you published Astrology, Science and Society.
That's right. That was a conference proceedings in 1980.
And now it's Astrology, Science and Culture.
That's right. Yeah.
So, all right. You are also responsible of the Uranian Trust or something connected?
I'm not directly involved with the Uranian Trust.
No, I thought so. Well, anyway. I would like to ask you a few questions.
Sure.
I will start with a more historical question about what is the specificity of the English astrology throughout the ages. I mean,
specificity of English astrology.
Well, you know, people say that it has played a certain role at a certain moment.
I think
the modern astrology, at least.
Yes. I think the most striking thing about English astrology is just that there has been so much of it for quite a long time. There's been a relatively high level of interest in astrology. Yes, I couldn't really explain that. I'd be a good historian if I could. And that level of interest means that, so to speak, there's been consistently quite a lot of astrology around, so to speak, in relation to other discourses and other interests. I mean, it's a minority interest, obviously, but nonetheless. And the fact that there's a lot of astrology around means that the astrology can afford to become quite complex. So you have a high or philosophical astrology. You have a middle class astrology where people are paying astrologers to tell them about their individual horoscopes. You have a popular astrology where many people are reading their sun signs or pursuing it at that level. So that means that the complexity makes it quite interesting as well.
Yes, it covers the all the levels of.
Yes, and most recently, of course, you have really quite a new development, a very interesting new development, which is a significant number of astrologers taking academic degrees, and in particular PhDs, where they study astrology. I mean, that's a pretty new development, obviously, in the last few years.
And afterwards, they are getting some positions?
That's tricky. That's going to be more difficult. Because obviously the intellectual climate is still quite conservative in relation to astrology. So it may happen.
I heard recently something about a new development against astrologers, or attitudes of the government towards astrologers, including them in a category which is not very very
Well,
appropriate.
that wasn't English legislation, that was EU legislation.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Across the EU. You would be, in theory at least, liable for some degree of fine or prosecution if you practice astrology without explicitly warning people that it is for purposes of entertainment only.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you know the story of this rule?
I don't know how it came about. It came into effect a few months ago.
I thought, so we are in France, we are going to be confronted with this rule?
Oh, absolutely.
One day or the other?
It's an EU directive.
Oh, we thought for a reason, Lindbergh told me about that a few months ago. I thought it was reserved for some reason to England. Not at all.
A lot of astrologers here are very upset about it. I'm not so exercised by it. It's potentially humiliating.
Yeah.
But astrologers really, have existed for so long on the margins, more or less.
It's one avatar.
It's just another little, problem to be got around.
Another test.
Yes, exactly.
All right. But precisely, well, it's like saying you can drink wine, but it's dangerous for your health.
I think it's exactly along the same lines. Warnings on cigarette packets.
Yes.
Yes, that's right.
All right. Well, let us pass to more fundamental question about philosophy. And I remember I heard you not so long a time ago at Amsterdam, and you produced certain thoughts about astrology and the statute of astrology. Recently, a few days ago, I interviewed Geoffrey Cornelius.
Oh, yes.
And, so I would like to delineate more clearly your approach of astrology. And besides, I don't think you consider it as an entertainment, but so how would you define the field and the vocation of astrology, if there is one, or is it only one?
Yes, well, that's quite a good question. I have come to see in recent years astrology as the dominant form in the West, so-called West, of divination. And in that, I agree with.
So you're not afraid to use the word divination, because in France it's a word which is taboo in astrological circles.
I see.
It's
Yes.
totally taboo.
I would probably, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would associate that with the persistent desire of astrologers to be seen as doing something that's scientific or potentially scientific, which I regard as an illusion and a lost cause.
A chimera.
Yes, absolutely a chimera. And in fact, by claiming to be scientific, astrologers, when they do so, are only giving ammunition to their enemies, who can then turn around and show that it isn't.
Yes,
most unwise.
I suppose also that even among astrologers who don't pretend to be scientists or scientific, maybe they don't want to be assimilated to divination or to clairvoyance.
I understand that.
They want to be a sort of superior type of clairvoyance. And they don't want, and moreover, they don't want to be considered as being the source of what they say, in sort of way. They don't want to be a channel. They want to be the interpreters of the knowledge. They don't want to have the knowledge coming from themselves, like clairvoyance would.
I think a lot of the attitude to divination, which, by the way, this hostile attitude to divination exists among English astrologers as well. It's quite widespread. Yeah. And usually they say something like, well, in that case, why don't we just do tea leaf reading? That's usually the reductio ad absurdum they attempt.
Yes.
I think this attitude stems from a complete lack of understanding of what divination actually is.
Yes, probably. Yes.
And almost a class attitude of superiority and contempt, which associates divination.
They've studied more time, they know more books. You know, that they
Yes,
have been at
that's right.
schools and there have been conferences
Yes, that's
which
which is
the
fine.
Clairvoyants don't have. They are more autodidact or something.
Well, interesting. One way to look at it is that it's a manifestation of historical ignorance. Anybody with a grasp of history and looking at the place of divination in ancient Greek culture or in Roman culture, the respect accorded to it, the centrality of it to the culture, to the politics, to everything, would not say, "Oh, divination, how common, how ignorant." You know,
Yeah.
it's a strange attitude.
Well,
So I would regard, when I say astrology is a form of divination, I'm perfectly happy to add that it is a very sophisticated, complex, rich tradition of divination.
one explanation I would suggest here is it's not the same type of people who practice these different fields. You see.
No, that's true.
Apart from the fact that finally it's the same, but the people who gather around astrology
Yes,
have a different profile.
that's true.
Sometimes what is important is not what the group pretend to study, but what the group is.
Yes, I know.
So
what you mean,
sometimes there is a certain type of people who gather and they say they study this and this, but the point is they have a lot in common socially, intellectually speaking.
Yes.
Apart from what they are supposed to defend or
Yes. Oh, I agree, and that's terribly important.
yeah.
I agree.
So we can't. They should. It's difficult for them to say that, but in fact, under the official label,
Yes.
there is a more deeper sociological specificity.
Do you know Ali Bird's PhD thesis?
No.
Recently, a woman completed a PhD from the University of Sussex, studying English astrology as an anthropologist. So she attended all the educational schools and so on, and interviewed many people. It's a very interesting social profile of English
Yes,
astrology.
there's a problem of promiscuity.
Oh yeah.
And it is true that although these different definitions have something in common, they are practiced by very different people, and also in a certain way by different clients.
Yes.
So, okay.
Just to return to your point about astrologers wanting to be interpreters of knowledge, it's complex because with divination you are asking for knowledge, you are requesting knowledge, right?
But you have a sort of...
But you still have to take responsibility for what you say, how you interpret the answers that you get.
Yes.
And there's no avoiding that responsibility.
Well, you know, when you are a channel, you can always say that you are transmitting something and that you just are the postman. I mean,
I don't accept that myself.
But if you want to develop a little more that point, I would say that different between how in French we have this, we can play with the word pouvoir and savoir and the astrologers do not pretend to have powers.
No.
They don't pretend to have special faculties.
No.
They pretend only that they received.
Right.
Not even in a hereditarily, but just by the books they have read. I mean, it's they just receive a certain culture. It's not a matter of nurture; it's a matter of culture.
Right. Yeah.
So they don't pretend to have received some sort of hidden talent from the grandmother, and from this point of view, they just say that they interpret and they decipher the documents they have, but no more than
that was quite straightforward.
But in fact, well, this is official. In fact, of course, a chart is not that easy to understand and to explain. But also, I believe that the clients also give importance to that point. Some clients, I always say like that the client of the astrologer is not there's no client astrologer relationship without the chart and without the historical knowledge, which makes four instances.
I see. That's interesting.
Well, with the clairvoyant and the client, it's a more direct relationship.
Yes, quite so.
First of all, the client will be more interactive. He will choose the card. He will pick the card.
Yeah.
It's not just been done according to birthday.
Yeah. Yes.
And the professional and the diviner, I just said, will not pretend that he has learned certain knowledge.
Divination requires a lot of knowledge. Any particular tradition of divination has its initiations, its acquisition of knowledge, how to interpret knowledge within that tradition, and so on.
Okay. Well, I would like to pass to a slightly different problem, which is points we have been discussing in my different groups recently. And it is a comparison between the astrologer and the physician. Okay. Which is also a rather interesting comparison.
Absolutely.
I would say the difference, the physician is supposed to have a certain knowledge of what is a normal body. A normal constituency. He is supposed to reestablish the illness is supposed to be something to be it is something which is not to be maintained as such. You have to restore the person to the normal and general status of mankind.
Yes, I agree.
Even if you have a very special illness or sickness, whatever, it may be very diverse, but finally the aim is to restore the person to the normal life, and the normal body.
Do you think there's a parallel with astrology?
No, I think precisely what is funny is when an astrologer is also practicing medical astrology. Because when he practices medical astrology, he is more or less oriented to behave like a doctor, that is to restore the person to his normal healthy state. But when he is an astrologer, apart from the medical side, he will have a difficulty to find the idea of normalcy, to restore the normal behavior, of the general behavior. And this is what I present to you. What is the idea of normalcy? And is it necessary to the practice of astrology to know what is the normal person, at least according to astrology?
I would say that ever since psychological astrology got underway in the last part of the last century, there's been an idea, quite common idea in astrology, that the patterns evident in a person's life through their horoscope, their birth chart, can have a healthy expression or pathological expression. So normalcy would be very individualized in that sense.
That's a paradox, because what is normalcy should not be a matter of individual. I mean, how could you say, I am a healthy person, but there is nobody like me, and I don't have the heart at the right place, or I don't have. I mean, this is a. But I was expecting sort of.
But I think there is a sort of parallel between astrology and medicine, insofar as if you are more likely, as an ordinary person, to go to an astrologer if you are disturbed or have problems that you feel are not normal to yourself.
Yes.
And in that sense, the astrologer will try and perform a therapeutic function.
Yes. But will he have in mind? I will understand that you are not normal if he doesn't know what is to be normal. Because we can imagine a physician who is not able to compare the set of his sick person with expected state of a normal person.
I see what you see.
So does he have a matter of comparison? See what I mean?
Yeah. I do see what you mean.
One thesis would be that the normal aspect, the normal side, I mean, the astrology as a norm has been occulted or has disappeared, and only the therapeutic or the pathological aspect has remained historically. It means.
So do you think there was a pre-modern astrological concept of normalcy?
I think that there is a whole description of normalcy in the astrological knowledge,
right?
Based on oppositions between winter and summer and normal cycles. I mean, there is a certain more possibility for astrology, especially modern astrology in a way, to develop what should be a normal development of a mankind and of a person.
Yes, I see what you mean. And I think that's dropped out of the picture by and large. I would agree. And the development through the moon part of your life, the Mercury part, the Venus part, and so on. Following that progression.
There's a sort of ideal scheme.
That's right. Yes.
Which exists, but which has been itself perturbated. This is a point. That is when this ideal state has to be reinvented or rediscovered, because in fact, when you study the knowledge of astrology itself, it is rarely very coherent and very satisfactory.
Yes.
But it remains the vestige of something which has probably existed.
So I would associate that change, that loss of that concept of astrological normalcy, with the rise of individualism, the entrepreneurial individual, beginning with Alan Leo, basically. But that implies that insofar as we're, arguably now in some sort of postmodern phase, maybe that will change. Maybe that will start to drop out of the picture, and some idea of more communal, social, collective, symbolic normalcy will come back. I mean, it's possible.
Yes, I think we'll. I mean, I am fighting in this direction precisely to offer to the astrologer a representation of what is a normal person according to astrology, what is a normal life according to astrology. That means not from an individual point of view, but from a common point of view. And then, of course, he can, with his background, with the knowledge of his background, he can, of course, study whatever particularity might occur with a person. And for instance, in my studies about Judaism, in the Talmud, for instance, they always speak of bad things which you have to avoid, which means they don't say you have to check to avoid what is good. You avoid what is bad. So what is good is normal. So if you are normal, you are normal. Now, if there are threats, menaces that you could, that your life could be jeopardized or disturbed by something, then it will be indicated, and then you will try to do something against it, which poses another question, which is, does the astrologer has to help the client to avoid what is announced in his chart, or does he have to say, well, this is your life and this is your soul? Or now the people say, oh, the chart is your soul. And instead of saying the chart is precisely what you should avoid or what is going to be wrong with you, it becomes to be a sort of ideal. Well, ideal, not real, but the real portrait, the real nature of what you are.
Yes.
And Rudyard probably hasn't understood this problem, because he has tried to justify the chart as the real being of what you are, and he has not understood that the chart is, as you said, or maybe you don't say that the chart can only be understood from a pathological point of view. It is your pathology. So I would say there are two astrology. For instance, I always give an example. If you are an architect, for instance, you know how to build buildings, okay, but you can also determine that something is wrong with a building, or if the building has problems, you can.
You mean with the design of the building?
Well, everybody who has a certain knowledge of a certain field will have, from time to time, to handle questions about what's wrong with this building, what happened with this building. Sure. So that means it goes with it. Whatever you do, you are supposed to be the special of the field, but it will include also all the problems which would come from this from some reasons. Right. Although it's not exactly what you want to do.
Right.
When you don't build buildings in order for them to be dysfunction. It's not the aim. Yeah. But you will meet these problems too.
Yeah.
So the astrologer is also someone who, of course, will have to be consulted if something goes wrong. Yeah. But he has also to know what is the usual and normal process.
See, in order to know that, I think the astrologer has to have some, I'm tempted to say, needs some kind of training in psychotherapy, for example. Or psychiatry. Or psychoanalysis. Because the knowledge of what is normal in this context is not an astrological, it's not available.
Well, I will not follow you exactly, because I believe that, for instance, what is normal for an architect is normal for an architect. You won't take the normalcy from another field.
Yeah,
so every field has to have its own normalcy.
Yes.
You know, and I would believe that the normalcy of astrology has not to coincide with the normalcy of the psychology.
Right.
But the question is, are we able to find our own normalcy? And at the same time, by knowing what is our normalcy, to be able to care about what is not normal. The paradox is, how could we be concerned with what is not normal if we don't know what is normal?
But are you talking about, let's say, a birth chart shows certain patterns? Are you talking about knowing what is the normal expression of those patterns?
No, precisely not. I would say no. I would say that the chart is only made, since the chart is individual. And individual is precisely what is coming when you are not normal.
And
because if you were normal, you would not need a chart.
But in that case, a normal expression would be, normalcy would be entirely without any astrological content.
No, not necessarily.
Because there would be no charts.
Besides, the point is that there might be an astrology without charts.
Okay.
First of all, for two reasons. First of all, there is the whole theory of cycles, which is not necessarily connected with charts.
No, quite so.
And secondly, there is all knowledge, a certain description of the world, which is included in astrology, in terms of planets, of houses, of signs of zodiac, which if you
but that knowledge needs to be interpreted in a specific situation.
No. As a description.
Well, for me, descriptions are not astrology. Astrology is the moment in which an astrologer arrives at a judgment about something astrological. It needn't be a birth chart, but it does have to be some sort of horizontal.
Well, for instance, I will give you an example to show my point. We mentioned a few minutes ago winter and summer.
Yes.
Okay. Let us imagine that I say that I give a lot of importance to duality. It means astrology tells us that the world is made of two different forces in many ways, and opposition of between day and night, between seasons, between youth and old age, etc. So What I say that this is what I would call the astrological normalcy. That you have to belong. Yes, but you have to know to which group you belong.
Right. Yeah.
Are you someone from winter? Not because you were born in winter,
no,
but because your nature is like that for some reason. And if, for instance, if you are young, you're not going to stay young all the time. I mean, there are things which will depend on your. I mean, the normalcy of astrology, apart from the fact that it is a certain representation of the world where you have to. And which will help you to understand where you are in this world.
I understand, yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you have to make your chart for that.
I think what you're doing, I understand what you're doing now, what you're referring to. It's like an astrological philosophy or an astrological way of life.
Yeah, in the medieval sense
which
of
is
philosophy.
Which in a sense is, which is quite distinct from horoscopic astrology.
Yes.
And I must say that most of my work and most of my thinking is only about horoscopic astrology. So, one must keep that distinction
exactly.
in mind.
It's a dialectic,
Yes,
I understand what is horoscopic astrology, but I say that this horoscopic astrology has to be understood as a moment, a case of someone who, for some reason, believes that he doesn't belong to the normalcy.
Yeah.
And at this moment, if he cannot live according to the, don't forget what I said about cycles, if for some reason he doesn't find his place in the system, then he has to study his own case or to have it studied. And this is another point, then I would say that what is important in the chart from this point of view is the dangerous elements. I mean, bad aspect. I mean, like when you are practicing medical astrology, you will not invest yourself too much in Venus, but more in Mars, etc. So the negative aspect that astrology has developed in terms of bad this, bad that, would be the center of this type of astrology.
Yeah, I see.
There will be a good astrology, general and collective, and a bad astrology, which will be individual, and with the study of basically of what is going wrong in the chart. Red aspects or things like that.
Sure.
But the chart should not. I mean, what I want to do is to articulate these two astrologies. How you pass from the astrology, as you said, the general astrology has to know that there is something can get wrong. Okay. And if it gets wrong, what do we do? So we see an astrologer with a chart. And the astrologer with a chart has to know that he has to reorient the person as a final aim to return to sort of more general, less specific idea of himself.
Quite Taoist, actually, your philosophy. I don't know if you know that.
Well, as a
Taoist. Chinese Taoist.
Oh, yes, sure. Yin Yang, yes.
And also being in accord with the way and being out of accord with the way. In your case. Anyway, what do you think of Rick Tarnas's book then? Because it seems to me to be...
Which one?
Richard Tarnas's huge new book, Cosmos and Psyche.
By whom?
Richard Tarnas.
Oh, I haven't read it.
Oh,
sorry.
Okay.
I will buy it. Maybe I buy it during
having a big impact on America, huge impact.
Okay,
on America.
So I will write it down later on, and I will.
Because it's an attempt to realign astrology in terms of cycles.
Yes. Sure. Okay. Well, I'm sorry I haven't reached that book, but I will do my best.
I have some philosophical problems with it. That's
so I cannot discuss unless you summarize these theories, this thesis. I cannot
don't know if I can do it justice.
No, it maybe not.
Maybe another time.
No, another time. Yeah. To return to another question, which is under what we say, it is. The coherence or the lack of coherence of astrological knowledge. I will give you an example which for the time being is discussed, is the matter of the axis. For instance, the question of the double houses,
Double houses?
Domicile, in Ptolemy Tetrabiblos, each planet has two sides.
Oh, quite so, yes. Okay, you mean rulerships, yeah, okay.
Rulerships.
Yeah.
One has not, that this system of rulership is articulated around Sun and Moon in Cancer and Leo.
Yes.
Which would make a sort of axis which would pass between Cancer and Leo.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is not at all a proper axis. In terms of seasons, in terms of anything you want, the axis would be between Gemini and Cancer, for instance.
Okay.
Which is a solstitial axis.
Yeah.
And for some reason, the whole system, instead of having put Sun and Moon on both sides of the solstitial axis, Moon on one side, Sun on one other side, they have invented another. They have invented another axis which doesn't correspond to nothing at all.
Well, it corresponds to the symbolic distinction between the Sun and the Moon, which is quite an important one.
Yes, but it's exactly what they do. But what they do does not correspond to the rest of the system.
In my view, there's no such thing as a perfect system.
Oh, yes. Yeah, okay.
So, and also, the lack of correspondence between a system and some supposed set of really existing objective correlates doesn't bother me in the least.
Okay. So I will give you some examples of the pervert results of such a shift. It's a shift. A shift which, by the way, could be explained by the question of the precession of the equinoxes. That, in fact, if you put the axis between the Gemini and Cancer in sidereal system, it passes to Cancer and Leo in tropical after a certain time.
I have to take your word for that.
No, but
I'm sure you're right.
Like for instance, Aldebaran, which is in Taurus, is in Gemini in tropical. When you transpose. You have a difference, a shift on one side. Yeah. But the question is, for example, you give it. I know on Sunday, Nick Campion will give a lecture on the history of astrology. We are now in France very preoccupied by how to teach astrology. See?
We should look at this thesis because it's about astrological education.
Okay. And for instance, do you think it is necessary to coordinate, for instance, certain planets with certain seasons, for instance? Because there is a sort of...
Well, obviously it only applies to the northern hemisphere, doesn't it?
Yeah, okay. But for instance, as you know, there are the interior planets, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, and the exterior planet, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Yeah. And there are also, of course... the transpose. But then, of course, you have also the duality between the spring and summer on one side and fall and winter, etc. Do you think that these two groups should coincide as in an order? I mean, for instance, if you take the rulerships, you notice that most of the interior planets are connected with signs of spring and summer. Yeah. Because they think and the last planets will coincide more or less with the signs of...
Is there a problem with that?
The problem is that it doesn't coincide exactly. Because March, for instance, instead of being part of the group of the fall and winter, as a part in Aries, which is a sign of spring, and Venus, which belongs to the group of the other group, has also a rulership in Libra. I just wanted to you if
I don't know about your experience, but my experience of life is that nothing coincides exactly with anything.
All right.
And I believe that to be the baseline.
Yes.
So one, you have to be very careful when you're tinkering with symbolic traditions,
Yes.
because if you change, I think if you change one thing, you'll find it has an impact over here.
Yes.
And then you have to change something else in order to take care of that.
Yeah.
And there's no end to the process.
Yeah.
So, for example, I don't use, if I'm interpreting a map, which I still do sometimes,
Yes.
I don't use Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in terms of rulerships.
No.
I use just the traditional rulerships because symbolically it's a very neat, lovely, elegant system, and you only mess it up if you start assigning rulerships to the planet's pole center.
Yeah. But to return particularly to our discussion about what would be the normal discourse of astrology on the world, I mean, if you don't try to restore a certain coherence of its knowledge, then of course there will be a problem.
But you say restore the coherence. I think all that's happened is we've lost our sense of its coherence as it is.
Yeah.
I don't think it's lost coherence. Astrology hasn't lost coherence. It's we who have lost coherence. Our sense of its coherence. And that's what needs to be recovered, is a symbolic sense.
Yeah. So you don't imagine that astrology for some reason had also lost a part of its normalcy and of its coherence, and that we have and instead of this initial astrology something which is for some reason corrupted. You don't believe in a corrupted astrology?
No, because I don't believe in a pure astrology. Or a pure anything.
So nothing surprises you in the astrological knowledge. I mean, you don't have to.
That's a problem. That's a problem.
No, because for instance, especially it's precisely someone who is surprised. If you are an architect, you enter in a building, you are surprised. You say, what does that mean? I mean, it's wrong. But if of course
things happen in astrology, new things happen.
Yeah, but new things is not
like the demotion of Pluto.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
That's interesting.
The addition of Chiron, decades ago, to the astrological canon, which I still haven't really got my head around.
No.
So new things do happen. But I believe what one of my students, James Brockbank, concluded in an article, which was that when something new comes along in astrology, it very rarely replaces what was already there.
Yeah.
It simply gets added to it. So the tradition accumulates and accumulates and accumulates. Now, once in a while, something drops out of the picture, but it can always be recovered. Look at the recent movement and program in Anglo-American astrology to recover classical Greek astrology or medieval astrological techniques.
What about fixed stars?
Nothing ever disappears completely. And I'm afraid you will end up with massive incoherence if you look at it that way.
Yeah. So I understand what you mean, that the progress is given by science, by nature, and not by the astrologers themselves.
Put it that way. What do you mean by progress?
I mean, astrologers
change.
Astrologer will change because the world changes, because the representation of the star changes, but not because they have changed their approach to astrology or they have reconsidered certain elements of their knowledge. It's only something which comes from outside.
Well, they do reconsider aspects of their knowledge under pressure. As all human beings, they only change under pressure. None of us ever change except under pressure. Nobody's in a position to sit down with a completely objective overview of anything and say, now, how could we make this better? I know, we'll change that. It simply doesn't work that way. Changes are pragmatic.
You have a sort of Darwinian conception of...
Well, they're pragmatic.
Pragmatic, yes.
Astrologers are of the world, not the other way around. They're a little tiny part of the world, and the world's changing all the time, so they have to adapt, as it were. You're right, in that sense, it's Darwinian.
So, to continue our little conversation, let's come back. You said you don't believe in a sort of first astrology, or what you said, primal?
Well, if there is a first astrology...
What was the expression you said?
We don't have access to it.
A prior astrology, you said? What did you say?
Pure.
Pure.
Primal
Yeah. what idea do you have about the emergence, the birth of astrology? Is it something? Is the appearance of astrology as a knowledge an important moment in the history of mankind, or an important conquest? Is it the moment where men are able to integrate the sky in their consciousness? And what does represent the astrological phenomenon in the history of mankind?
Well, I think it was very significant, but I'm also reluctant to feed astrologers compensatory fantasies of their self-importance, which get out of hand sometimes. So I didn't want to do that. But I think, for me, in my opinion, astrology plainly grew out of an animistic apprehension of the cosmos at a time when the cosmos was fully alive for us, as everything was.
Yes.
And actually, that we still have, despite all the subsequent overlays of Platonic philosophy, monotheism, and modernism, we still have potentially, we can still touch that way of being in the world. We can still move into that and participate in that way of being in the world, although it's massively discouraged. So astrology grew out of that kind of relationship with the sky, where you are the astrologer and is in a dialogue with the stars. And I think, when astrology is properly understood and properly practiced, I'm talking about horoscopic astrology, you recover some of that world. Now, gradually, that relationship became codified, it's systematized, obviously beginning with the Babylonians, then passing into Greek astrology. It got massively systematized and hardened and rigidified and turned into various kinds of dogmas without ever entirely obliterating that original sense. That's more or less how I see it.
Let us pass to finally to a major question about astrology and linguistics, or astrology as a language. It's a very common expression we hear about astrologers saying astrology is a language. I think it depends on what is a language. There are several philosophies of language.
Right.
And first of all, how do you react about this idea of astrology as a language?
Well, I think it is a language, but I don't think it's only a language.
No.
And also it does depend on how you define language.
Yes.
Obviously, if a language is, strictly speaking, linguistic, that is to say, to do with words, then astrology is obviously not completely a language in that sense, because it's primarily symbols, which then have to be turned into words.
As a language...
But you could have a broader definition of language.
Ask the question more clearly. Do you think language, any language, has its own knowledge, or is a reflection of any sort of knowledge? Is there any intrinsic knowledge within a certain language, or language is by essence the mirror of any sort of philosophy, or is there a philosophy for instance, is there a philosophy in English, in the English language, or in the French language, which is not the same philosophy, for instance?
Well, it seems to me obvious that every language carries its own implicit philosophy.
Yes.
There's no. I cannot believe anybody still takes seriously the idea that there is a neutral language, or a language which merely reflects and mirrors some kind of reality to which it's external. It's impossible.
So if you apply this, I agree with you. If you apply this idea to astrology, what is the philosophy of astrology?
Well,
if astrology is a language, precisely.
Well, I can't summarize that, obviously, but obviously astrology considered in this way has a certain inflection of reality, encourages certain perceptions or engagements with reality and discourages others in its own particular way, because that's absolutely unavoidable. So the idea of astrology as some kind of meta-language, I think that's quite indefensible.
Yeah. But we return to the point where we didn't really agree that You know, can a language be corrupted? For instance, we have a good example with English. Is English a corrupted language?
Corrupted from what?
From, precisely, a language could lose its knowledge by becoming so permeable to the external world that it has lost any consciousness of what he is internally.
Well,
I like the idea of pathology of knowledges.
I see, no.
There are knowledges which lose their soul, lose their logic, who just become instrumentalized by the world.
Yes, of course, if something becomes completely instrumentalized, which in our time essentially means completely commercialized, or possibly politicized, that is arguably a kind of corruption. I agree. I think astrology is pretty robust, though, in that sense. Certainly, it has degraded versions. You can read them in any newspaper, but I don't fear for astrology really in that sense.
We decided to come back to one of our first discussions a few minutes ago, that there might be the possibility to bring sort of general astrology, which would say general things that astrology think about the world, in opposition to a more individual astrology. There is also this idea that there is a language which would have its own philosophy, and a language which would be as diverse as a reality is, which would stick to the diversity of reality and not to its own internal meaningness.
But a language is, so to speak, a thing, so to speak, okay? I mean, it's an entity, it has an identity. English has a certain identity, French does, astrology doesn't. That's unavoidable. Part of having an identity is that you have limits. Now, if a language is very old and rich and flexible, it will be pretty tough and pretty enduring and pretty flexible, okay? But it will not be without limits. And it's quite possible for a language to encounter situations which test it past its limits and even destroy it. That can happen to any language. So I don't see it possible that a language could be infinitely applicable.
About the day, for instance, do you think that the 21st century is a century? For instance, do you think there? For instance, I think about the elections. This, the practice of election, not in astrology, but in political elections, which create certain events at a certain moment because they have decided a long time ago that there will be an election this year. What about astrology in this system? Do you think that this system, which determines events artificially in a certain way, does coincide with astrology or does interfere with astrology? Astrology has its own rhythm of life, and all these systems of elections, 4 years, non-astrological systems, are proliferated, and they are introducing.
Are you talking about bureaucracy, bureaucratization?
No, I just say, for instance, if it has been decided 4 years ago or 10 years ago that in this very year there will be an election.
Right.
There will be, and that will create an event because there will be people who will gather, who will choose a new leader, etc. And that will, I would call it a sort of substitute to astrology,
Yes,
and which will in fact interfere because in fact astrology has its own real rhythms, and here we have sort of artificial rhythms which will which will not coincide, although some astrologer will also, of course, try to understand what will happen with these elections. I mean, more generally, does our society not only with the electoral system and
the whole thing,
but also the technological system, also with the financial system. All this does not. We could think that it will make more difficult to identify the astrological phenomenon.
I'm afraid you'll think me a great cynic or pessimist, but I've said for many years to astrologers when they want to listen that they shouldn't wish too hard for astrology to become mainstream. Because if it did, the only change that would happen would be that the forms of organization, bureaucratization, repression, coercion, and so on that we're now familiar with would become astrological.
Yeah.
I don't see that as a gain.
No.
I don't see that as a profit.
Well, it may be better for us anyway to have, because if you define super artificially the time of an election and the time of a mandate, it is as an astrologer you might be inclined to prefer that this calendar would correspond to an astrological reality and not just a sort of total formal invention which will change from one country to another, etc.
But that's the problem, Jacques. I don't believe in reality in that sense, astrological or otherwise. I'm a fully fledged, for better or for worse, pluralist or relativist, and so by the time we get to any form of reality with a capital R, it becomes something else for us. And I'm afraid that I think that applies to astrology as well. So I don't think really it would help matters to organize a society astrologically.
No?
I'm afraid not.
Oh.
Sorry.
Too bad.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Well,
for some reason, astrologers don't seem to want to hear this. I don't know why.
Yes.
They keep
you're not interested in what astrology has to do about mankind as a global system, or in mundane astrology in general?
I think astrology works much better, and it's better for astrology for it to remain marginal.
And interested in individuals?
Well, perhaps giving rise to philosophies, astrological philosophies, which themselves are creative expressions of thought, which some people take up and maybe some groups take up, but not the mainstream society. As far as I can see, all the creative, valuable ideas come out of the margins. They come out of people who are not in the mainstream, not very powerful, and not too far out of the mainstream, not too marginal either, but somewhere in between, which is why I think that if astrology has a planetary deity, it is Hermes. It's not Jupiter, it's not Zeus. We were not meant to be powerful rulers. That's not astrologers' role in life, okay? It is to be hermetic. Quick, flexible, intelligent, moving across margins, bringing in new ideas, etc., but not a major player in that sense.
This is true. For instance, you hear very often the argument that the influence of the planets is just like the influence of sun and moon.
I don't use the idea of influence of planets.
No, but I mean the statute. Do you have any idea how mankind discovered or invented the connection they have, not with the sun and moon, but with the planets, which is another story?
Well, whatever that connection is, it's not a connection of influence. The idea that the planets influence us is nonsense.
Maybe they are fixed as sort of
signs.
Signs. Yeah.
Not causes.
No. Okay. But these signs, have they been determined or created by human societies, or have they been deciphered by humans? As opposed to deciphered. I mean, there are signs.
They're deciphered by humans. Whichever way you look at it, it was humans.
Yes, but in one case, it's signs which have been decided without the humans.
Impossible.
Okay.
How can you? If you take these humans out of the pictures, that's no astrology.
Okay. So yeah, I agree. So in fact, it is a creation of mankind. Astrology is a creation of mankind.
Co-creation, I would say.
A co-creation. So what is the other person?
The intelligence of the world, the cosmos. The cosmos has its own intelligences,
and
agencies,
we are
agendas.
part of it.
Absolutely, we're part of it, but we're not the only part of it.
Yeah. So it's not something that mankind has imposed to the. It's not what we could call an instrumentalization of the heaven by mankind.
The idea that we have imposed or projected or given meaning to the world is simply human arrogance. As if it's our right to do that.
Yes.
We can do that at will.
Yeah.
It's an absurd idea.
No. We have just discovered in ourselves something which is part of the whole universe.
Yes, absolutely.
So to think.
We're just a little part of the universe.
Yes.
For us, we're a very important part.
Yes.
But not beyond that. I'm going to have to go soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Patrick
Jacques.
Curry.
Enjoyed that very much.
I think, we have understood your approach. And
Thank you very much. Thank you. Lots of food for thought.
Yes, as you said, there may be a future for astrology, or
of some kind. I'm sure there is. Okay.
Which is what you say.
Well,
but precisely, if we finish in 2 minutes about the conception that Patrice Guinard has developed, and I think you even invited him to a Kepler Day in 1996 or 1970.
Yes.
And do you share the idea that astrology is developing normally? That what astrology gives today is what it has to give. As if it was
unchanging.
No, but something which any change that astrology would know would be a normal process. As we said, there is no corruption. There is nothing. You cannot just say astrology is wrong. Astrology becomes what it has to become. It's more or less the idea of Guinard, which I was, and I have the feeling that he has said something which corresponds to the expectation of many astrologers. They believe that astrology is just following its path, and that it's not very useful to come back to its origins, for instance, or to define what has been wrong in the process. I think
it depends on how you do that. If you do that in a way that says, by returning to supposed origins, putative origins, I'm very reluctant to say what those origins precisely are, because that takes a lot of nerve to say that. But by doing so, we arrive at a better astrology in the sense of a more interesting one, a more fruitful one, a more profound one. Fine. But if you say, by returning to some set of origins, we're returning to the true astrology, that's a very dangerous and inflated claim to make. And I would reject